Ladies and gentlemen, we left off with the fall of the Roman Empire, but before we move on to the Middle Ages, I just wanted to make sure that we're clear as to what that actually meant for this time period. There's certainly a lot of discussion, sometimes even controversy, over whether Rome actually fell. And that's because of this. Remember Diocletian, he divided the Roman Empire into two parts, and the Germanic tribes invaded and took the city of Rome itself, but they never took the eastern portion of the Roman Empire. So this eastern portion of the Roman Empire is going to become known as the Byzantine Empire. When we talk about the Middle Ages and the developments and the historical events, what we're referring to is this western portion of what was the Roman Empire, which is what technically fell in 476 AD. So the Franks. The Franks are a Germanic tribe. They were probably the most influential Germanic tribe, but most importantly, they gave power to the Catholic Church during the Middle Ages, making it, or helping to make it, really the dominant force in just about every aspect of people's lives. One of the first kings was Clovis, and he's significant because he actually converted. He was the first Frankish king to convert to Catholicism, to Christianity. And he did this because he wanted to gain the support of the church and the Roman aristocracy of that point in time. It was not a very organized, very orderly period of time. And so to try to ease some of the chaos, he needed help. And he looked to the church for that help. But of course, he had to convert in order to do that. The second king was Charles Martel. Charles Martel is very significant in giving power to the church. If we take a look first at this map, you will notice that all of this purple, this is all Islamic territory. This is controlled by one of the caliphates. And if you notice, they were able to gain control all the way into what's now Spain. So there was a very real threat for the Catholic Church at this point in time that really Europe was going to be taken over by this caliphate, by these Islamic warriors. And Charles Martel in 732 AD defeated the Muslims at the Battle of Tours. This is what really stopped or saved Europe, so to speak, from this invasion, and therefore stopped the spread of Islam into Europe. Now, how does that give power to the church? Well, it saves the church. It saves their authority. It saves their position within Europe. Going back, we also have Pepin. Pepin did something for the church that directly gave power to them. He was asked, as well as Charles Martel, but he actually did it. He was asked to help the papacy defeat some of the tribes that were still giving them a little bit of a hard time, in particular the Lombards in Italy. And he defeated them between 754 and 756 AD. And the land that he received as a result of this defeat, you'll notice it down here a little bit, this was going to become known as the donation of Pepin. And the reason why we call it the donation of Pepin is because Pepin literally donated this land to the church. And this is some of the land that's going to become known as the Papal States. And we've already learned the theme. Land equals money, money equals power. So Pepin was literally handing over power to the church. The next and probably the most famous Frankish king was Charlemagne. Charlemagne is going to do a lot for the Frankish Empire, and he's going to really build a Frankish Empire. But first, how did he give power to the church? Well, if you recall, during the Roman Empire, pretty much the Roman emperors crowned themselves. There was no one above them at all. And anyone who might have been a threat to go above them was quickly done away with. Well, Charlemagne is also going to be crowned emperor, but in a very different way. Right? He is going to be crowned emperor by the Pope, right? Symbolizing that the Pope now has more authority than these kings. Right? This is really a huge demonstration of the Pope's power during the early Middle Ages. Now, Charlemagne is also going to build quite an empire. He's going to be able to reunite a lot of this territory, particularly in what is now modern-day France and Germany. But when Charlemagne dies, his empire is going to be divided up into three parts in what's called the Treaty of Verdun in 843 AD. See, when Charlemagne dies, he leaves his empire to his grandsons, and of course, they fight over it, and a variety of various civil wars break out, and the end result is this compromise. But we know from Alexander and from the Roman Empire that any time we divide up an empire, it's going to weaken it. It's going to leave it more vulnerable. And that's exactly what happens with Charlemagne's empire. Once it's divided up, it's weakened, it's going to become more vulnerable again, and it's going to lead to outside invasions, particularly by one particular group, one specific group, known as the Vikings. So, take a moment, take a look. Which one of these people do you think is a Viking? Now, most people will say the one here on the right, but that would be incorrect. See, the horns, the long beard, the various aspects of what makes us think this is a Viking all comes from a bias. And in most cases, it's a rightly so bias. But we think of the Vikings sometimes with these horns because it was the churches oftentimes that they attacked. And so the monks in particular portrayed these men as the devil. And that's where you get the horns from. But let's talk about perhaps why they led these invasions first. Right? They are from Scandinavia. Today Scandinavia is made up of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. And just a little bit about its geography in that region. It's pretty difficult to grow crops. It's mountainous, a lot of rocks, very cold winters, really not that warm for the summers either. And so it's difficult for them to produce any sort of food up there because of their geography, which then forced them, according to their documents, to look elsewhere for food. Right? Now, we know a little bit about the Vikings because of the stories that they wrote. They're called sagas. But most times, those sagas were written from their perspective. So oftentimes, they're seen as these very brave warriors who were able to travel very, very far thanks to their means of transportation, the longship. But not everyone saw them as heroes, so to speak. You'll see in various places, particularly in monasteries, these towers that are erected. And that's because the Vikings did attack many of the monasteries, knowing that these monasteries had valuables in them that they could then use to trade for other things that they needed. Right? The monks did not see the Vikings as brave warriors. They saw them as people who were attacking their property and attacking their possessions, and then ultimately attacking God. So they had a very different opinion of them, and that's where you get this stereotype that the Vikings had horns. Right? Now, how were they able to travel so far, particularly during this time period? They were fantastic navigators, seafarers, and they used these long ships to travel. They traveled so far, they reached Canada. And which is incredibly difficult, thinking back to the early 1900s when the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic. Here, these Vikings longships were able to travel such a great distance. Right, so to conclude with the Vikings, these Vikings, their invasions were one of the external factors that led to the fall of Charlemagne's empire, meaning that this factor was outside of Charlemagne's empire, not within it, like the civil wars were. But most importantly for our purposes, these invasions, as well as the invasions of other groups, led to the rise of a new social and political structure that we call feudalism. And we're going to look very specifically at what feudalism is, how it functioned, and what it's going to eventually lead to.